Welcome to the Impact Players Linking Shields podcast with your host, Warren Mainard and John Beazley. Our mission is simple, inspiring men to be great husbands, fathers, and leaders by equipping them to thrive in the relationships that matter most.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Impact Players Linking Shields podcast. My name is Warren Mainard. I'm the National Director of Impact Players. With me is my co-host, John Beazley, who is the founder of Mind and Body. And together we are so excited to host Clint Hatton, a man with a tremendous wealth of wisdom and experience that he's going to share with all of you guys today. Clint is an author, a speaker, transformational leadership coach. He's the founder of an organization called Big, Bold, Brave. But more than that, he's an impact player. He is a husband, a father. He's a leader. He's a guy who cares about investing in other people's lives to transform them and make an impact. And today, Clint is going to be sharing some powerful, life-changing insights about navigating tragedy and how to do that well in your marriage. You are not going to want to miss this story. It will shake you to your core and build you up at the same time. If you're new to Impact Players, thank you for joining the Impact Players community. We are an organization dedicated to inspiring men to be great husbands, fathers, and leaders by equipping them to thrive in the relationships that matter most. We do that in a lot of ways. We offer cohorts and gatherings for men all over the country, resources for men and men's ministries that are looking to grow as husbands, fathers, and leaders. And another way that we do that is through this podcast community. We hope that you will take some of the lessons and the nuggets from this podcast and implement it into your own life in a way that makes you better equipped to thrive as a husband, father, and leader in the days ahead. So let's get into the podcast. John and I were so glad to welcome you, Clint. Thank you for joining us. And please take a moment to just share a little bit of who you are, your marriage, your family, what you're doing now for a living.
Okay. Thanks, Warren. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to you guys for having me on. I mean, it's a huge honor. What you guys are doing it's so needed. It's so powerful. And we were laughing a little bit about, how to introduce me before we started this interview. And to me, you talked about the most important thing, and I sincerely mean that, and that's being a husband and a father. The rest of it can change over time, and it has over the course of my lifetime. But that's the foundational goal of mine, is to be a great husband and a great dad. So honored to be with two guys that also value that so much. So thank you for having me on. As far as what I'm doing now, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of my past story that led into this, but I do predominantly two different things now. I am a professional speaker, so I do leadership events and workshops, different things like that with different types of companies. One example, I did a leadership event for Starbucks a while back. And, some of it's, I don't like to use the word motivational, guys, because that means to take action. Whereas that could be just a simple move that doesn't really gain much. Transformations mean you change. And so, any talk I do, and what we're going to talk about today with what we're all going to have to say, hopefully it's something that gives someone the tools they need to actually make a transformation, not just get excited about doing something, right? So anyway, I do that at churches as well. I was a pastor for 17 years up until 2023. And so I still speak in churches. And then I also work with a company called Excellent Cultures, which has actually been around a very long time. They're based out of Seattle originally. Now it's here in McKinney, Texas, but they started almost 40 years ago. And we work with companies anywhere from a startup that's pretty established up to one of our clients is, for example, the president of Toyota. So we got Microsoft guys. So we've worked with a lot of companies. And basically what we help them do is we help them build their culture and leadership development from the top down. So from the CEO, the senior leader, whatever that is, through their system with what we would call a servant leadership model. So those are kind of the two things that I do, but mostly I'm excited to be a husband of 21 years. I have 3 boys, one that we'll talk about specifically here in a little bit, that I've been very proud of to father over the years. And then I love to do this kind of thing too. So let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so funny, Clint, because like whenever you kind of meet a guy, I think this is a man thing. Like whenever you meet a man that you really don't know that well, the natural thing is to always kind of start with those top level things, like this is what I do for a living, these are my accomplishments, like this is my resume, all that kind of stuff. And that's good. Like I think it just establishes kind of who you are a little bit and where you're coming from. But what we know is that guys all have a deeper story. And you can meet a guy, let's say at a conference or at a business networking event, and you look at that guy and he's sharp, he's polished, he's got it all together. And then you sit down with him over a cup of coffee, or you go for a walk with him, and all of a sudden kind of the story comes out. And certainly, just a few weeks ago, you and I had a conversation. I was out walking as we were talking. But we were on the phone, and as we were sharing, both of our stories kind of just flowed out. And that was when, man, my heart was just captured and honestly broken for you and your story. So you mentioned your 3 sons. Your oldest son's name is Gabriel.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Gabriel story, because there are guys that I know that when they hear the story, it's going to do something inside of them that is going to be really powerful. So share a little bit of your story of your firstborn son, Gabriel.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So Gabriel, anybody that's got multiple kids, it doesn't matter if they're boys or girls. In my case, I just happen to be a boy dad, but they're all different. They're all valuable. They all have their gifts and their talents. And he was no exception. He was super smart from day one, sometimes too smart, because his communication ability was very strong at a very young age. So, by the time if the guys who aren't there yet, by the time your kids get to, I don't know, 13 to 17, somewhere in there, typically you're going to have a little bit of pushback verbally on some stuff because they're beginning to think they know stuff, right? When it happens and they're like 6, you're like, dude, whoa, time out. It's too early. But that's kind of how he was. So he was very strong-willed, very opinionated, even from a very early age, but ultimately, just a really good kid. And then what happened and what kind of led to where we're going to end up in this story is when he was about 8-ish or so, his uncle Danny flies planes. He actually runs a little airport in rural Oklahoma, kind of on the side. It's not what he does for business, but he's got multiple planes. And so one day he went up with them in one of his little aircraft, and he just got the bug. I mean, that was it. The minute he got back down, it's like, I want to be a pilot. And so he really, grabbed a hold of that. And he was definitely goal oriented. He was definitely, very energetic about if there was something he wanted to do, he was going to do it, but he's still 8. So, some time went on and we didn't think much about it, because there was plenty of time in between. But ultimately what happened is by the time he was a freshman in high school, he had decided that, no, this is really something I want to do. And for us, first of all, that's a daunting thing. I don't know how many listening are going to, have the background on what it takes to become a licensed pilot, but it's not a cheap hobby, right? It's not pickleball. And so you're talking about in some cases, $10,000, $15,000. I know people have spent upwards of $40,000, $50,000, depending on how they go about it. So we're just like, okay, bud, well, that's awesome. But, we were, pastors at the time, and most would know you don't get into that for the 8-figure income. So we just told him, we'll see what God does. And so what was crazy and this was all what we really felt like was truly God answering for him and blessing him for his dream, because even though we couldn't afford it, he ended up finding this club that was like 7 minutes from our house at a local airport. And this dude who started this club, he's a little bit of a legend in the aviation industry. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, it was on Discovery. I don't know if it's still on there now, but there's a show called Airplane Repo where these guys go, and exactly what it sounds like. They go and fly all over the world, repoing anywhere from a Piper to a Learjet, and it's a crazy show. But Kevin is the founder of this club, and that's a part of what he does. And so anyway, he started this thing for kids, and it's a 4-year program through high school and into their, early, 20 something age. So he was able to start learning about, just the nuts and bolts side of stuff. And they literally would help rehaul engines and do wiring and paint. And, they had all these different parts and things donated by aviation companies. And so really early on, it was just, he was getting exposed to it. And then another thing that was really fortunate, we moved actually from the Seattle area back here to McKinney, where we had lived years ago and didn't even know it. But our school system, our district actually implemented a 4-year aviation program in the high school as well. So it was a really unique setup, right? We're just like, all right, God, thank you. This is awesome. And so ultimately where that led was, by the time he was 16 years old, that's when you can start flying. He started to fly, and we didn't have to pay a dime. Literally, the flight instructors donated their time. Really, the only expenditure was the gas, which was, they got it at wholesale, because that was also, given to them at wholesale price. And then he earned $1,000 scholarship through American Airlines that paid for pretty much all of that. And so next thing you know, literally before he's got his driver's license, he's flying, or I should say it this way, he had his driver's permit, but before he was able to drive a car by himself, he jumped into a plane and soloed, which was a weird experience as a parent. So that's Gabriel. It gives you a little bit of an idea, very adventurous, very brave. He had graduated a year early from high school, taught himself how to play guitar. He actually was an amazing photographer. And even though he wasn't technically a professional, he got hired to do gigs to do that too. So, it gives you an idea. Just, he was just one of those kids where, I used to tell him, I'm like, you've done more by the time you were 17 than I did by the time I was probably 35. It was just, that's how things were rolling out for him, And so here he's chasing his dream. Everything's just rolling our way. And then he got his, the earliest you can get your actual private pilot's license is 17 years old. So once he turned 17, boom, took the test, passed it the first time, did his check rides, boom, became a pilot. Dreams, first dream, check. And he's on his way. And at that time, which a lot of people would recognize this now if they follow the aviation industry at all, we knew there was a lot of change happening. There was going to be a bunch of pilots that were going to be retiring. And so it was the sweet spot for a career. So that was the path he was on through. There was a couple of different routes where he was going to be able to potentially work for American here in Dallas. So we're just living the dream. He's living the dream. Then September 23rd of 2019, once you're at that stage, it's all about getting hours. You're just flying as much as you can. And that's what he was doing. Yeah. And September 23rd, he had a friend who, in a very strange coincidence, I guess you would say, was in town here in McKinney for a funeral. And she wanted to get back to school. She lived in Arkansas, went to the University of Arkansas, which is just a few hours north of us. And, wanted to get back quicker. So her and her mom asked, hey, Gabriel, would you be willing to fly her back home? And he's like, oh, of course, so that's what he did. And so he flies her on that evening back home. And then he had some friends that went to the school as well. So he spent just a little bit of time there. And then he jumped back in his plane. And on the return trip, he only got about 20 minutes. And we ended up getting a phone call. And that phone call came in about 8:00 at night. I was actually walking in from running some errands. I don't even know what I was doing. And, all of us know that look on our wives when, they're on the phone or something, their face, just something's not right, And so I walk in, I see the look on her face and I'm thinking, what, I don't even know what could be going on. And then I hear her, she's talking to Kevin, his mentor. Immediately, you're just like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So we found out, he disappeared off the radar. We don't know where he is. He's not answering his phone. And so, I won't take you guys through the whole thing. It's just too long of a night, but it was a night from hell. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. The nutshell version is there was a lot of confusion. He went down in a very rural area, in a little mountainous area, which they said there was no cell phone coverage. So search and rescue were up there for several hours. They're telling us, I keep calling the sheriff's department that's in charge of it. They're telling me they don't know anything yet. Meanwhile, we're following it on our phones with local news stations, and they're reporting things on their own, to the point where they even at one point at about 1 a.m. said, a single fatality. And we're just like, what's going on? So the night was just awful. And then about 3:30 in the morning, we got the official call and found out that a lot of the confusion was not really confusion. They just had a policy, because they knew at 11 o'clock when they found him that he was gone. And they just needed the coroner to sign off on it. And so, we went through several extra hours of thinking and praying and believing and, declaring and doing all the things that you do when you're, believing that your loved one's going to make it. And then it just didn't turn out to be our story.
Mm-hmm. So I just couldn't imagine. By the way, I'm a boy father, dad as well. I have 3 boys. Gabriel sounds like very much like my son, Adrian. He's talking back to me. 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there too. So I was hearing your story, and I was just picturing, because he's one of those overachievers, really smart when he was very young. And I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. And I'm thinking, like, how do you go from, like, how you just described yourself as, like shouting affirmations, praying that God would come through, whatever you did, like, how do you navigate something like that? Like, what is a biblical response? And let me couch that a little bit more clearly,
Sure.
Because a lot of times, like in a church context, like, they don't really teach you how to lament and grieve. It's almost not in our vocabulary. It's kind of like, oh, we're sad, but they almost try to spin it redemptively.
Yeah.
And when you go through something tragic, you actually just don't want something redemptive at that moment. You really want to feel those feelings and process. Like, how did you and your wife process that? Because no doubt there are men listening to this.
Yeah.
Different scenario. Maybe they've lost a child, but they're just like, I don't know how I can continue to believe God in this situation. Like, how did you guys navigate that?
Yeah. And that's a great question, John. There's a series of events. It's not a solely in the moment thing, because you're processing everything in real time. And I would even say, and I wrote this in my book, I believe, and by now, by the time I'm talking to you guys, I think I've done 80 interviews in the last year and a half. Many of those have been with licensed therapists and professionals, and other people have lost people. So I have a lot more data to back up what I'm going to say. But, I really believe the entire first year, I call it the year of shock and awe, because there's constant things going on, like a birthday rolls around, Christmas rolls around, there's all these little different things that keep happening, because life doesn't stop, Yeah. So it is a process. I don't want to imply to anybody, as I begin to answer your question, that, that there's these 3 steps and that's what you do. It's not that simple. Right. But I will say, when the word first came in and we knew he was gone, there's really no way to describe it, because I had to turn to my bride and tell her. And that was the second most gut-wrenching thing I've ever done in my life. The only thing that was harder, and it was harder for different reasons, was his 2 brothers, who were 9 and 14 at that time, were asleep the whole night. They had no idea what was going on. And we let them sleep in. We weren't going to let them, we weren't going to talk to them at 3:30 in the morning. And by the time 3:30 rolled around, actually my wife's mother and my father-in-law were here as well. And so that discussion with them was clearly the most painful thing I ever had. But the first thing that happens is it's raw emotion. We were devastated and just bawling and snot and, heaving, and you can't breathe, and your chest just feels like it's going to collapse. And there's this just hole. I mean, it's a body, mind, spirit, soul, assault all at once. And so, that's the first thing, we just had to allow ourselves to do that, and then what really happened, and I'm going to try to describe this in a way that is going to make sense to just about anybody, because I know not everybody necessarily is a person of faith or a believer. And so I don't want to isolate anyone from their story or make them feel any different. But there were some things that happened even earlier in the day. And I'm going to give you one quick one that I still find super strange, but I think somewhere in the background, God was helping me even when I was in excruciating pain. And what happened was in those days, I was really into walking. I'd walk like 10 miles a day. I was out on a normal walk that morning, and I think most of us have had something like this. You can call it whatever you want, daydreaming, vision, whatever. But I was just walking along the golf course, and all of a sudden I'm just like seeing like this live dream, while I'm walking along. And in it, I was in our house. I'm back in our house, and I was running around frantically, and I was looking for the boys because I was going to take them across the street. We have a very tight neighborhood here. We know our neighbors really well. And I was going to be taking them over to two of our neighbors that are moms, Margaret and, well, anyway, the names don't matter, but I was going to take them over there because I had really bad news to give Amarillys, that's my bride, about Gabriel. And then all of a sudden, I'm like back in my walking again. And that's a bizarre experience, right? And any of us who are dads, you can't help the fact that sometimes we just think of bad stuff happening, right? I mean, there's lots of bad stuff in the world. So that's all I chalked it up to. I just thought, okay, no, not having that, there's nothing. And so I just prayed, honestly, just a very simple prayer and blessing over him and forgot about it.
Yeah.
And then it was when the call came in, or excuse me, yeah, that's right. When the call came in and I officially knew he was gone, I remembered that. And I was just thinking, I don't understand what you're doing, God. I don't understand what you're doing, but did that have something to do with this? And this is really in my mind, I'm not sharing this with my wife. So I bring that up because I do feel like there was something going on that God was about to help me. And so what happened was we came out of the bawling and all that stuff. And then, as a dad, you do feel like, okay, I'm the leader of this family. I got to say something. And so I hadn't been thinking about it. I didn't have this plan. I hadn't read a book about it, but literally in the moment, I just said, okay, guys, here's two things. One is we have two choices on how we're going to view Gabriel's death. We can choose for the rest of our lives to focus on the tragedy of it, all the things we're not going to experience with him, all the things we're going to miss. And if that's our focus, we're going to be shells of who we were created to be. And then again, it was like intuitively, spiritually, however you guys want to reconcile it. And then the next thing that came to me was, and here's the other thing, we're going to do this as a family. So I gave everybody permission that morning that, listen, we don't know what grieving is going to look like. And anybody listening to this, there's no formula. What I'm going to describe to you today may be very different than what you do. But I said, we don't know what this is going to look like. So we do know, but here's what we are going to do. And that is, we're going to feel every bit of it. We're not going to fight it. We're not going to bury it. And so, my boys are 9 and 14. At our house, using language is not a thing, not that it never happens, but, it's just not a practice for us. But we even told them, we said, listen, if you're upset and you need to cry, you need to cry. If you're angry, you need to be angry. If you're so frustrated that you suddenly feel like you just need to cuss, then you need to know, cuss. And there's no penalty. We just basically said, everything is in play except for one thing. You can't do it alone. And that started with me. So we can kind of launch where you guys want to go from there. But, I just knew in that moment that I needed to be the leader, not just in the strong, here's the strategy, here's the plan, but I also need to be the leader in, I need to grieve well first. I liken it to, I never really thought about it this way before, honestly, until I'm talking to you guys, but we're on a plane and they're giving you all the, here's how you put a seatbelt on, the mask drops down, and most of us ignore all that, right? But what do they tell you to do? They tell you to put on your own mask first, right?
Yeah.
That's really, I think, a great way to explain it, is I felt like I know I need to grieve this thing out authentically and honestly. And so that's what we're going to do. And you guys need to know that we're all going to do it together.
What I don't want to be miss here, which I think is so profound, is the typical reaction, I think, from a dad would be strong front, grieve alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What you're saying is that you're like, no, we're not going to play that. I'm actually going to lead in, this is devastating. Let's not pretend that it's not. Mm-hmm. And let's grieve together. I think that's powerful.
Yeah. No, and John, that's the thing, again, I didn't know what I was saying, really, at the end of the day. It's just what I felt like I was being led to do. But since, again, I've done an enormous amount of research, I've got friends now that are clinical therapists and stuff like that, and neuroscience and things like that. And we know now there's an enormous amount of evidence out there, science-based studies, that burying it is absolutely the worst thing you can do. It's the worst thing you can do for you. Mm-hmm. And it's the worst when you have children. It's one of the worst things you can do for your children, because you're teaching them to stuff it. Yes. And we know there's all kinds of, and we don't need to get in the weeds with this, but over time, there's all kinds of psychological and even physical and emotional baggage and fallout from living that way. So that's a profound question, you guys.
And to me, this is really kind of at the crux of what I wanted to try to get into today, which is, you talked about, you're like, okay, I just got the worst news of my entire life. And I also have this sense of, I need to lead my family through this.
Right.
And I mean, the wisdom, the insight that it sounds like, the Lord really just kind of imparted to you has been profoundly helpful. But let's kind of just unpack that a little bit, because it's not like you gave that one speech and then,
Right.
From that point on, it was like, oh, Dad already talked about that one speech, or my husband already talked about that. We don't ever need to rehash this again. But in reality, it's like, how did you kind of find the right tension between being that strong leader, that pillar, that source of strength, that refuge for your wife and your children, and yet also grieving well in a way that gives them permission to grieve, but also gives them hope to keep going? And then were there some kind of outside, resources that you personally turned to get support or to vent your own feelings so that you could come back into the home and be really regulated to lead your family well? So I know that's a lot, but just kind of maybe try to grab the heart of that tension between leading your family and yet also being emotionally in touch with your own feelings and with those around you.
Yeah. Help remind me on the latter part of that question, as far as just outside help, because there was ways that we involved that later on. But I got a couple of quick examples to help answer your question, because it happened in real time, right? You don't get to say, okay, time out. It was Tuesday morning. We still had work. The boys still had school. Life didn't just stop, and it doesn't for anybody. And so really, circumstances just began to unfold like they do in real time, that I don't want to say push is probably too strong of a word, but you can't avoid it. We couldn't just lock ourselves in a house. So we just really took it one small chunk of the day at a time, is really what it boiled down to. When he passed away due to this plane crash, we didn't even realize until a week later when we did his celebration service. And that's part of the answer too, that the whole, that was how are we going to honor him and how are we going to do this? And so there's a lot of decisions that somebody has to make. And so we're doing all this stuff, but he had, so many friends that were in aviation. He knew, kids that were football players. And, we ended up finding out he actually had personal contact information with the VP of an aviation company. I mean, he had like these old salty pilot dudes from all over the country that he knew because of Kevin that we didn't even know he knew, So there was a lot going on. And the very first thing was we knew that we had to serve others in the early stage of the tragedy. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying it that way very intentionally. I'm talking that first week, because even though our pain was truly greater than anybody else's, nobody can compare their pain to ours. But we weren't the only ones. And it was devastating. And so one of the very first things that happened is we got a call the next morning. There was two. One was the young lady who was his really good friend that he had taken to Arkansas. She was already starting to suffer from survivor syndrome. Her and her mother both apparently were telling people that they assumed that we absolutely hated them and blamed them. It was their fault and, all this. So within an hour or two of finding that out, they were in our living room. Yeah. And we were talking to them and, helping them understand that, he was living his dream and, of course he decided he wanted to do it and it's not your fault and all those things. And we prayed over them. And of course we're all crying and we're hugging. And so my boys are witnessing that, right? Mm-hmm. They're seeing us care for people in our pain. They're seeing us encourage other people in our pain. And then they're seeing us weep in our own pain. So that was one quick example where my boys are watching it happen in real time, right? And then later that night, we found out that the club was already talking about maybe shutting down the entire program because of it. Mm. And couldn't have any of that. Mm. Gabriel would have never wanted that. And so that evening we were out at the hangar. There was probably, 25 of the kids that are involved in the program. A whole bunch of the parents who were normally not at the hangar were all gathered there. And we went and we kind of held a little, meeting with them there and just encouraged them and told them, listen, Gabriel was living his dream. You're living your dream and he would never want you to stop. We don't want you to stop. We 100% support you guys. And again, it was kind of the same thing. It was another real-time example of our boys in particular, just seeing us just kind of work this thing out as we go. And it caught really quickly, because like Joel, my middle, this is all the same day. We asked him, what do you want to do? Because he was a freshman. Freshman football's on a Wednesday. So that's just the next day. And it was their homecoming game. And we're like, do you want to go back to school? It's your choice. If you don't want to go back to school, we can keep you out for a week or whatever we need to do, and he just immediately said, I'm going to school. I'm going today and I'm going to play for my brother. Mm. So I'm like, so that was a little heavy. And so we ended up going together. I went with him. We met with the principal. We met with some grief counselors, just kind of set up some parameters to make sure that, if he had a really rough moment, he would know what he could do and where he could go. But then Wednesday night, here we are, we're sitting in the stands of a freshman football game. And I got to tell you, it's a weird freaking experience. There's part of you that's going, should I be here?
What am I doing here? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really in real time. And I'm looking at, anybody that we're a 6A football program. The only reason I'm bringing it up is at the freshman level, there is still no difference. There's normally about 30 people at a freshman football game. I mean, there's just not a big crowd, right? And we go in and word had gotten out around town and some of the other people that knew us knew Joel had dedicated the game. So there was like an extra 100 people in the crowd with signs and all this stuff. And it's just like, oh my God, what are we doing? And as a dad, and John, this gets into part of what you're asking me. I was in real time. I was thinking, gosh, I don't know if I made a good decision here. What if he doesn't play well? What if he was a running back? I should point that out. So what if he doesn't play well? What if he has a rotten game? Oh my gosh, what am I, So I was fighting all that in real time, but he had made the decision, and it was really important for us to allow them to make some decisions along the way on how they were going to grieve this out.
Yes.
So I'm in between literally tears, grieving less than 48 hours, Gabriel's still gone, and trying to watch my son play football, you know?
Yeah.
And truly, it's like storybook. He's a running back. He's a playmaker. You know, we knew he had ability, and he'd already made lots of plays earlier in the year, but the coach didn't put him in right away. I still to this day don't even know if that was by design or not. But we're a few plays into being on offense, and they put him in, and he's on about the 40. They're on about the 42-yard line. And the very first play, they pitch him the ball on a sweep, and it looks like there's no way he's gonna gain maybe 5 yards. You know, they've got the angle, and somehow he just kicks on this. I mean, he's a fast kid, but he kicked on these afterburners, and he takes off down the sideline, and he streaks on his first carry for a 42-yard touchdown. And then he bobbles the ball at the 5 and almost lost it. And I mean, everybody's going nuts. Mm-hmm. And I'm like half totally proud, can't believe what I just saw. Mm-hmm. And then there's this other side that just believes Gabriel's watching. And it's just like this crazy blend of reality and emotion and all of these things happening. And so, later on, we ended up having a great conversation, after that. And it was a really powerful experience for Joel. And it became the same thing for Liam, who he was a martial artist at 9. And so that's what he chose. And we all chose to be what we call big, bold, brave. So that became a family mantra long before it was a company or a book. But anyway, so I don't know where we want to go with it now, but it was.
I do want to make a comment.
Yeah, please do.
Just an observation, a couple things. First, like I'm actually kind of fighting back tears hearing the story. It's just like so powerful. I could literally see him running across the field, bobbling the ball at the end, and but just hopefully this doesn't sound in any way like offensive, but there's this kind of beauty that's emerged from feeling intense pain and joy at the same time. And that's what you were describing. It's like, I don't even know how to put these into words, but intense joy, intense pain. I was thinking about this because I just read a book by a psychologist. His name is Scott Symington, and he wrote about anxiety and also trauma. And he said, and it was interesting, you did this with your family. He said, ways to move past is by first giving yourself the anchor of healthy distractions. And he says healthy is going to a distraction that's actually going to help you, not harm you. So you're not going in like just eating bad stuff or doing drugs or doing alcohol or something like that. But you're like, if you can move towards life in the midst of the trauma, then you're actually saying that this doesn't have control over me, even though I'm still feeling it. I'm going to move towards life, and I'm going to acknowledge this. It's not like you don't spend time acknowledging it. And I was like, hey, that's kind of what you guys did. Yeah. You acknowledged it, you felt it, you didn't play around it, but you moved towards life and saying, we're gonna continue to move forward with, taking control of life. But then he said there's the anchor of loving action and not just it's easy to become self-absorbed when you're anxious or you've gone through something traumatic. And your kids saw you moving towards life, serving people, and how that played about a healing process that no doubt that you still feel.
Yeah. But, we're still in it, really. Yeah.
But you were saying that, I was just like, this is just beautiful picture here of God's grace.
Yeah.
But your own fortitude. Go ahead, Warren.
No, I mean, that really, really resonates with me, and something that I was going to ask, because, that story, I mean, to be in that football game less than 48 hours after your son died, like, I mean, I'll be honest, like, there are people that can't comprehend that, and that like would even be like, I can't believe that they would do that, like that, just that whatever judgmental thought. And without going too deep into some of our story, but we had in our family a young man who was like a son to us. We thought that he was actually going to become our son-in-law, and had been a part of our life for almost 10 years. And in a tragic turn of events, he died of cancer at the beginning of 2023. So we're only, 18 months removed from his passing. And we're not even obviously biological parents. We're not his biological family, but even in spite of that, just because he was so dear to us, there are times where we've said to one another, like, do you ever feel guilty about enjoying a moment in life, knowing that Brady is not going to get to enjoy this, knowing that, that loved one that died too soon is not able to enjoy this? I know what that feeling is like from this position. I can only imagine what some of those conversations have been like for you, for your wife, for your boys. Like, what is that kind of like? And have you gained any kind of wisdom or insight about how to answer those questions, either the ones that come from within or the ones that come from without?
Yeah, man, you both said some really great stuff there. And John, that was not even close to offensive. You were 100% dead on. That's the best description I could even give of what you experienced, because it's not either or. That's the thing. Most people think you're experiencing either the pain or the joy, and there really is a space in certain circumstances where it's both. But I think, the way I would answer that, I want to say something I haven't said yet. Anybody listening to this needs to know that we are not perfect people, and we haven't done anything I described perfectly. We've had to recalibrate and remind ourselves, hey, you didn't talk for a couple of weeks, you let yourself get kind of isolated, and so there's recalibration, there's accountability, and so there's a lot of that. My middle son Joel, to be very candid, and this is something I have not shared a lot in a lot of the early podcasts for very obvious reasons that'll come to play now, but he's in a great space now. But he really struggled. He really did. He played, I shouldn't say play. He went along with our internal process as a family in terms of talking about things openly. So he did do that, but he did really struggle, John, with, why even care? Here's Gabriel, who was bigger than life to him, first of all, and we all knew was bound to be a CEO of some major corporation. I mean, he excelled, right? And he's like, why even try? And so he had a lot of destructive behavior, especially during high school. And there would be peaks where his parents would be going, okay, I think he's on track. He seems like he's doing good. And then boom, the bottom would drop out and something would happen, And so, this is not a clean, easy process. I don't want anybody to be under the impression that we had, like you guys said earlier, made this incredible speech on the morning of, and then, hey, we were just good. It's not like that at all. But I will say the intention and what you decide is what's going to mold what you recalibrate to. And so I didn't use those words earlier, John, when you were saying, you were choosing life, but that's exactly what we said. We're going to choose to live the way Gabriel lived. We're not going to choose death. And so just that decision, as time rolled on and different things would happen, and, we'd be, grieving because it's his birthday, or, he's got friends that now are pilots and we're seeing them become pilots. We get on an aircraft, and a lot of these pilots are young now. They're about the age that he would be right now. There are triggers everywhere.
Yes.
But that intention that whatever comes our way, we're going to process it, we're going to feel through it, and ultimately we're going to choose life. We're going to choose to do everything in our power to live the life that we were intended to live. And that's how we're going to honor Gabriel. And certainly, for us, how we're going to honor God, which comes, first, of course. But that's really how we treat Gabriel, is that we're going to honor him by living that way. So even though it wasn't perfect, and even though there have been missteps and bad things, still happen, and it's not the only thing that's happened to us since he passed away. Joel actually less than 2 years later hit a median on one of our major highways at 75 miles an hour, flipped around 5 times. The car was disintegrated, and he somehow walked out with one scratch. I mean, literally crawled out of, if I showed you guys a picture, you go, no, nobody gets out of that. The EMTs, the cops are all like, he shouldn't be here. There's no way. How do you process that?
Yeah.
Seriously. Because I'm telling you, were we grateful he didn't pass away?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, 100%. We were so grateful. But at the same time, we came that close to losing another one, And so that in and of itself created some internal, emotional and mental and spiritual tension where we had to work through those things. So life doesn't stop, things continue to happen, but what you ultimately decide are going to be your family values and your intention and how you're going to live your life out has to be strong enough to where you can recalibrate when things aren't going your way. And if there's a more helpful question that you want to ask, I don't know if I'm making sense with that. I'm trying to really help somebody.
No, this is rich.
Okay.
Have you, even up to this point, because you have this, obviously ministry, it's powerful. I'm sure it'd be easy for you, or I shouldn't say easy. Like the tendency would be like, you have to put on a strong front now. Look at I forget the title of your ministry. What is it? Big, Brave.
Oh, Big, Bold, Brave. Yeah.
Big, Bold, Brave. Thank you. So you have this, but like, just honestly, do you ever just sit back and actually really struggle in your own faith journey, even today? How would you?
Sure. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, so the very first gesture, Big, Bold, Brave, I won't tell you guys the whole story because we want to focus on what's helpful for people and not just my story. But in the morning after, it became national news because of what happened. And we were approached by Fox Dallas and they wanted to do a story on it. And I told them no. And then the lady who happened to be a believer as well, the reporter, she says, well, I just want you to think about it because here's the reality. We have been assigned this story. We have to tell the story tonight. If you'll let me, you can tell it your way. You can say anything about Gabriel you want to say, and you can even include, your faith, whatever you want to talk about, and it'll be a story about his life. But if you don't do it with us, and she was very kind about this, it's going to be a report on his death. So as a family, we talked and we decided to do the interview. Guys, I don't remember a single thing about that interview. The only reason why I even have any picture of it at all is because we have a video of it. Mm-hmm. But somewhere in that interview, at the end of it, I don't even remember saying it, I said he lived his life big, bold, and brave. So after that got played back and we heard it, that's one thing that we grabbed as a family. We have this mantra now. So whenever we're feeling a certain kind of way and feeling defeated or losing our faith, okay, big, bold, brave. That helped a little bit. Then I got a tattoo. Now you guys aren't going to be able to see it. At that point, I was 54 years old. I don't know how everybody feels about, tattoos. I never had a reason to get one, but I decided, and there's a story behind it and doesn't really translate very well on a computer. So I won't try to do that, but I decided I'm having this story created on my arm. And the reason why I put it on there is because I knew I need something every single day in my face.
Yes.
That's going to remind me this is the intention that I set for myself and for my family. And so that's been helpful. There's been days where I've been challenged, but the truth to your question, John, is absolutely, of course, and I'll say it even this far, because we get asked all the time, did you ever get mad at God? And, did you ever stop talking to him or whatever? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. But here's the craziest thing. And to me, I could give a lot of testimonies of the goodness of God in my personal life. My story before I ever met my wife, I have a crazy story as it is, but the one thing that I think has stood out to me, and I just shared this actually with the church last week, more than anything, is there was a period of time after the first year or two, whatever it was, where I wasn't reading my Bible the way I usually did. I wasn't praying. And I'm not saying I never did. It's just, it wasn't my normal routine. I wasn't journaling. I had my back, maybe not totally back to God, but I was turning to the side,
Yeah.
And the most amazing thing to me about the goodness of God is even when I knew that I was ignoring him and not wanting to talk to him, there was never a time, and I mean that 100% sincerely, there was never a time where I ever felt like he wasn't there. Ever, to this day. So that's a huge part.
He was there, you were just confused.
Oh, 100%. Just trying to live through this thing, Yeah.
Welcome to Impact Players, where we inspire men to be great husbands, fathers, and leaders by equipping them to thrive in the relationships that matter most. Are you asking yourself, how do I become a better man? How can I grow as a husband and father? Can I succeed both at work and at home? We believe the answer is yes. Impact Players provides rock-solid answers and practical tools for men who want to improve in every area of life. Whether you're single, married, a new dad, or a grandfather, our men's groups, leadership training, and resources will help you thrive. Recent studies show men are struggling more than ever. That's why Impact Players is here. We offer cohorts where you can connect with real men like you, courses with actionable steps, and a nationwide community dedicated to winning at home and at work. Join our online community today and access a wealth of materials designed for your growth. Transform your life, impact your family, business, and community. Ready to get started? Visit impactplayers.org now. Be the man you are destined to be with Impact Players.
I haven't shared much of my story, and I won't take too long to do this because we're getting towards the end, but my wife and I had a son who was born with medical complexity. And we haven't lost it. Well, we had a miscarriage, but we haven't lost a child in the sense that you have lost Gabriel. But we've come really close to losing. His name is William. We've come close to losing him when he was really little. He was born with golden heart syndrome. He has one eye and one ear. He's the cutest little guy, but had an upper airway problem, so he has a trach.
Okay.
And there was one night he wasn't breathing very well, and we're going to do a trach change. We pulled out his trach, and he seized up. We couldn't get the other trach in, and his whole neck area filled up with blood.
Oh, wow.
And I screamed. I was just like, just yelled out like, what's happening? And I thought we lost him. Once he went limp and fainted, put the trach back in and did some air, and he came back. But we've had probably a dozen times like that we thought we just lost him. No, we saved him. He's alive. He's alive. And there's so many times I've relived that trauma over and over again. Yeah. And I want to tell you, man, there are times where I've just you're talking about kind of turning halfway towards God a little bit. There's times where I was just like, I don't get you. I do not get what you're doing. Because we were in church planning, serving the Lord, felt like we're sacrificing. You know how you tell yourself the story, like, I'm doing so much for you. What in the world are you trying to rip my world apart? It's not the world that's the issue. I feel like it's you are the issue right now. And I just went through that whole narrative. And the reason why I was talking about this kind of unique beauty of pain and joy coexisting, because we get triggered. There's so many times where something happens and I'll be sitting there looking at my son like, will he make it to his 8th birthday?
Sure.
I don't know. But there's something about this pain that has created a deeper intimacy with God than I can explain. But I still have moments where I get a surge of anger, frustration.
Yeah.
But there's a beauty there that I would never want to not have with God. Does that make sense? I don't know if you could relate.
No, 100%. We've been through some other things that are a little bit similar. Liam was born 3 months early at 1 pound, 14 ounces. and was hospitalized for 2.5 months.
Oh,
And so he, there was multiple times during that process where, you don't know, they stop breathing, because their brain and their lungs are not connected yet, anyway, a lot of what you said, I don't want to get into other stories, but everything you just said is so true. I mean, we're real human beings.
Mhm.
And so I think sometimes people expect you're either this, and when we're talking about people of faith, you're either this super believer who's made of steel and everything bounces off of them, or you're so weak that one thing happens and now, you're in a ditch somewhere on meth, right? And the truth is there's a middle ground with all of it, and you can feel those things simultaneously. And I 100% agree with what you said, that listen, and I want to be very clear about this, because this is a question I do get asked often. I 100% know God did not do this to us, and we didn't have to lose Gabriel to gain that kind of a perspective. I don't believe God does that at all. And to me, it's very scripturally clear. So would I choose another way to learn these lessons? Oh, 100%. I'd do it today.
Yeah.
But what you just said is very true. And we know we don't get him back on this side, but we've learned to find that beauty in just remembering who he was, what he did. And one of the things that I think you didn't use this word, but I hear it in what you're saying is gratitude. Gratitude is a powerful force. I personally think it's a tangible substance. I think it's a real thing. It's not just a word. And there's something about, for me, even being grateful about the 17 and 8 months that I did have with him, that has been a real game changer as well. That's allowed me to have pain and joy.
Wow.
Well stated.
Yeah. Hey, Clint, one of the things that I observe about podcasts is that, typically there's, a host and a guest, and they're talking with one another, and our listeners are listening to our conversation. But I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to speak directly to the listener, and maybe just take a minute to just share whatever is on your heart for that man that may be in the midst of a tragedy or a difficult situation in his own life. If you were sitting down with him right now, face to face, and you had a minute to just share your heart with him, what would you tell him?
Yeah. Well, if I was sitting with someone, which I've done many times since, I would ask him first, just, man, how are you feeling? I mean, some of what I'm going to say is going to sound super simple. I would just say, hey, man, how are you feeling? Be real with how you're feeling. And you've got to embrace that. And you've got to allow that for a period of time. That's the first step, because John said something a little bit ago that I want to point out. You were talking about, just feeling that this type of PTSD, right, is what you were describing. Well, we know now with modern science and brain research and all this stuff that trauma does get trapped physically in our body. That's another reason why one of the interesting studies that I read about is tears. Do you know the chemical makeup in your tears are completely different depending on what generated it? So a tear of joy has a completely different chemical makeup than a tear of grief. And grief is toxic if it stays in you. So wherever you are, my friend, you've got to feel the pain. You've got to let it out. You've got to be honest. You've got to just be willing to just feel some of that and not just push it down. To me, that's number one. Then the second most important thing I would say to somebody who's really in the fight right now, and Warren, you had asked the question earlier, we hadn't quite gotten to it, I'll just weave it in here, is you can't be an island. You can't do this on your own. We were created to need other people. And so I have had other men in my life that I could go and have really real conversations with. And when I'm saying real conversations, I'm not talking about going and finding somebody to give me all the answers or for them to tell me what to do. I'm talking about the kind of friend where I can sit there and have a conversation with him. And if I'm pissed off, I can be pissed off, and he's not going to try and talk me out of it. Or if I'm tearing up and I'm crying, he's not going to just try and say, "Oh, okay, come on, dude, it's okay, it's okay, don't cry, don't cry." Whatever it is. I'm talking about that. You need a man or men in your life that you can just go be real with. And so if you don't naturally have that in your life, man, there's a lot of good people out there. Go find a really great clinical therapist. We're believers, of the three of us. There's a lot of really great clinical therapists that know what they're doing, that also are people of faith. And so if that's a concern of yours, go to someone like that, or maybe it's your pastor, maybe it's your former football coach that you trust, whoever. But to me, those are two primary things that you must do as soon as possible and do consistently, because life goes on, my friend. It really does. And you're going to get through this. And if you don't know God yet, I mean, it's the greatest game changer in my life, bar none. He's carried me through things that I never imagined I would get through. So I would certainly say turn to the Lord, but you've got to know. There's a phrase that we say sometimes: this too shall pass. The emotions will pass. The trauma won't have to devastate the rest of your life if you make that choice. Just choose to love yourself enough and the people around you, because there's other people, whether you know it or not, are waiting on you right now to be the fullness of who you are supposed to be. Man, just make a decision that I'm going to live again. I'm going to choose life, like John said, and I'm going to take a step, and I'm going to pull other people in to help me do that.
Wow, Clint, this has been so powerful, and I knew it would be. I've been looking forward to sharing this time with you, because I just am so in awe and admiration for the way that you've been able to carry that tension that we've talked about throughout this whole podcast of being that big, bold, brave man, and yet at the same time being a child of God, dependent on his heavenly Father, who is being held in his hand. And I think that's a beautiful thing when you can learn how to do both those things well. And you definitely modeled that. As we wrap up, how can guys who might want to follow up with you or contact you in any regard related to the work that you do or the story that you tell, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, I think the two quickest ways and easiest ways now, one would be just to go to the website, which is bigboldbrave.us. Yes, everybody, I know it's actually US, but I say us because I think collaboration is a game changer, right? And then if you're a business guy, if you're someone that's in business and you're interested in learning a little bit more about what I do with that, my LinkedIn profile is probably the best way to go for that.
Okay, and we'll certainly tag you in these posts on LinkedIn and encourage guys to reach out to you and check you out. Guys, this has been such a great time for me. Not every podcast is quite so heavy, but I think that there's just something powerful about when men can get into this kind of stuff and talk about it together. And I hope maybe even some husbands might let their wives listen to this podcast, and it might open up some dialogue for them to talk through some of these things together. But if you are a man who is looking to get connected with a band of brothers who can walk with you through difficult seasons, highs and lows, successes and failures, please reach out to us at impactplayers.org. Wherever you are, we want to help provide a space for impact players to minister to you and to provide a band of brothers for you and the guys around you. So for John Beazley and myself, Clint, thank you so much for being on this podcast. And we truly hope we get a chance to reconnect with you again on the pod and continue this dialogue of what does it look like to be a man of God and a child of God all at the same time. And thank you again. We're truly grateful for this time.
It was my honor. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Clint.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for joining us for the Impact Players Linking Shields podcast. We hope you're inspired to become a better husband, father, and leader. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave a 5-star review, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Stay connected and continue your journey with us. Visit impactplayers.org for more resources and updates. Thanks for being a part of the Impact Players community. Keep thriving in the relationships that matter most.